David, Jennifer, I'm not looking for sympathy, just a little bit of sympathy maybe, but I've come down with what I'm calling a violent flu. I don't think it's COVID or anything like that, and let's not worry about that anymore. But my question to you is, what would be your remedy? What would be your advice for getting me back up to 100%?
Well, probably stop calling it flu for a start. Blatantly not. It's cold, David. So take paracetamol, decongestant, max strength. That's what a nurse I knew advised me. So always go straight to the max strength. Don't bother with anything before, and get your nighttime ones for nighttime, so you've got less caffeine in your system and you'll get a better night's sleep.
Wow, we know where to go for sympathy, don't we?
All right, let's see if I can make it through the next 20 odd minutes of talking to you two with no sympathy. Hi, I'm the absolutely fabulous David Ewell. I'm never being boring as I bring you your weekly agronomics podcast exploring the economics of agriculture. I can't promise you opportunities, let's make lots of money, but what I can do is help you understand the market forces at play and explain how they could impact your business. See, it's not so hard. This week I'll be looking at bluetongue, which is a big threat to the beef, lamb and dairy sectors. I'm joined by my colleagues Jennifer Morgan to talk about the Battle Bluetongue campaign, and David Swales to learn more about a calculator we at AHDB have created to assess your risk, protect your business and defend your stock. Please follow and subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode. Wednesdays are a red letter day when new shows drop at midday. And please get in touch. Comment on any of AHDB's social channels or send us an email, agronomics@ahdb.org.uk. It's been another busy week at AHDB from an economics perspective. On the podcast last week, we were talking to Susie about the Milk Forecasting Forum and the forecast that we produce. So that was released at the end of March, where we were saying that GB milk production for the 25-26 season is expected to reach 12.6 billion litres, which is 1.2% more than the previous milk year. Again, it was just very positive market conditions promoting production because of good milk prices, relatively lower feed prices. Everything is pointing to producing more milk. That milk to feed price ratio, one of our favourite ratios, is firmly in the expansion zone, and it will be interesting to see where that goes for the rest of this year. Something else that's in an expansion zone is the cattle price, and it was only recently, maybe towards the end of last year, that's still recent, on this podcast that we were talking about £5 per kilo being the new norm for cattle prices. So it was the start of September 24 when the steers price broke through that £5 a kilo mark, and the cattle prices just kind of kept on going through there. So we haven't messed around. There's still very tight market conditions. We've rapidly broke through the £6 a kilo mark, £6.50 mark, and we are heading straight towards £7 at this rate. The latest prices that we had towards the end of March were coming out around 677 pence a kilo. It is continuing to move up, and it is just an outstanding market at the moment, purely because there is, again, tight supplies, strong demand. Obviously, we had Mother's Day recently, and I saw a promotion from one supermarket that was offering roasting joints for beef at £6.49 per kilo. So the roasting joint that was on offer was cheaper than the deadweight market. And again, if we're getting that kind of retailer-led demand, we saw it in the lamb market last year in Easter 24, where there was a strong promotion which led to a tight market and strong prices. And we've seen the same again for the beef market, where there's been some promotions on the retail sector, but ultimately that market has just been really tight of supply for a prolonged period. And this is what we see when you have tight supplies and the demand remains strong. The price can only go one way, and in economics that price is up. And another thing that I saw recently is around a planned strike of cereals and oilseed growers who are intending to not load any milling wheat from their farms in the first couple of weeks of April. what I wanted to focus on there was actually just the contractual element, and really just to encourage growers to make sure that they understand where they stand from a contractual perspective with regards to loading grain. Let's remember that contracts are based on a buyer's call basis. So it is when the mill needs the grain that it calls upon it, and then the merchant calls upon the farmer to move that grain. So just be conscious of contracts, and obviously considering we've seen the grain market and milling wheat premiums drop over the last few months, if we're in a position where contracts are being looked at, just be very careful. Basically, make sure you understand where you stand on contracts before making any decisions, just to make sure you are safe and protecting your prices within those contracts. We are joined in this first part of the podcast by Jennifer Morgan, our Head of Strategic Communications at AHDB, because we wanted to talk about the Battle Bluetongue campaign. And it's something, Jennifer, that we have taken a leading role in developing and rolling out at this important time for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. For those who aren't aware of the history of bluetongue in this country, I mean, there are several variants. What we're talking about today is bluetongue 3, and that really came to light towards the end of 2023, so October actually, when we started seeing a spike in cases. Since then, it's been prevalent throughout 2024. We kind of went to a high vector period, and there were quite a few cases. And now at this moment in time, farmers are really starting to see those calves and lambs being affected by the infection that they've had in the last year. So AFA and DEFRA are looking at a multitude of cases, and they're sort of ascertaining at the moment what the full extent of that is. But in the meantime, AHDB, from the emergence of it, so end of 2023, linked in with Pinstone, who look after the Ruminant Health and Welfare website and the associated network there. We linked in with them, and we started building a collaborative group of 26 industry associations. So we're looking at organisations like NFU and AIMS, National Sheep Association, and other interested parties. And we realised collectively that we needed to be heading in one direction with communications, because when something emerges like this, a disease outbreak particularly, what people need is clear advice, accurate information, so that they can make the best informed decisions, and if there's any guidance available. So that's what we did as a group. We formed one collective unit where we focus and deliver consistent messaging, so that farmers and vets who are supporting farmers can look at the cases that they're encountering and make decisions that are right for them. So towards the end of 2024, when we sort of headed towards the low vector period, we thought now's the time to take stock and think about what communications are going to be most effective and most useful for vets. And we've had a lot of feedback from industry groups, from vets, who said that they weren't getting any specific guidance to help them when it comes to diagnosis, when it helps them to looking at ascertaining what the risk is for farmers and their stock, and, simply what to say and what process to take them through. So as a group, we developed quite a few tools. There's a risk assessment tool that can be that starter conversation. But we realised there was a wider picture, something that was really missing. And really what we needed to do is badge it under a campaign so that everybody started to recognise a particular branding, and then they would realise that there was a suite of information and resources available that they could use. And that's when we came up with Battle Bluetongue. And we specifically came up with that terminology because it really is a battle. What we want people to feel is empowered to make decisions, and that they've got the right tools to hand to make any sort of decisions, and to have those conversations that will help them make those decisions. So the key phrasing that we came up with is assess your risk, protect your business, defend your stock. And you'll notice these sort of analogy phrasing that we're using that is very reminiscent of a battle of military toning. And that is because it's, it takes a collection of people to try and support somebody to get the outcome that they need. And the outcome, obviously, is to protect their stock and protect their business for future use. So that was kind of how we came up with the concept of it. And then since then, we've launched a variety of resources. So for vets particularly, they can use social media assets. We've designed posters. We've got questionnaires that they can take with them and speak to their farmers. So all of those things are designed to help on-site meetings or local meetings with all the farmers in that area. So we're really trying to support everybody having those discussions and helping them mitigate risk overall to support their businesses.
I mean, we'll talk later on in the second part of this where we talk, I suppose, a bit more about the numbers and the economics, but this is more about, as you said, explaining that potential impact. Because everyone, I think, understands the importance of biosecurity. We've been through a number of different disease outbreaks across different levels over a number of years. But I think in some ways, the risk as we see here from Bluetongue is, in a way, I suppose, a bit of the unpredictability of it, because it's hugely impacted by the weather as well. And it's something whereby it may seem that last year it might have been focused predominantly on the south and the east, and it didn't stretch significantly far into the sort of centre and west where significant stock is held. But it is something that ultimately is a risk, and it's something that we need to just make sure that there's that ongoing conversation about, that ongoing diligence towards. And I think from our perspective, from everything that you've said there, Jennifer, is making sure that there's the resources in place so that farmers and everyone within the industry knows what the situation is and knows what to do.
Exactly. And I'd also say, in addition to what you've just said there, that the primary areas affected were the east and south coast, but there were cases in Scotland as well. So, it did stretch further north and further east than anyone thought it might. So it's not necessarily a localised disease outbreak. It did spread across, certainly England and Scotland. That's the thing, is we're trying to make sure that everybody is aware of Bluetongue and what to look out for, because people quite often sort of get mixed up with Schmallenberg. It has very similar, initially at least, very similar symptoms. So it is making sure that they're having those regular conversations with their vets. And because vaccines originally weren't available either, it was something that people couldn't necessarily do anything about. But now there is availability for vaccination. So it is that time where people need to be speaking to their vets and looking at the most effective way of treating their stock, or the right stock, because it's complex and it's going to be different for every business. But that's why it's really important to have those individual conversations.
So what's next from, I suppose, the communication perspective from AHDB? We've held a number of webinars and things previously, haven't we?
Yeah.
All of those are still available on our websites, etc., and historically on YouTube, all that kind of thing. So where do we go next? What's the next resource, etc., that's going to be coming out from our side?
David Swales is about to talk about the calculator that we've produced that will help people ascertain the potential cost and impact. But I won't talk about that. I'll let David do that. In terms of communications, we're expecting to be going into a high vector period soon. We're looking sort of towards the end of April, beginning of May, where we're going to be looking at numbers increasing. The winter has been very mild, so normally the cold temperatures would kill off midges, but that's most likely not have happened. So we are expecting communications to need to ramp up in light of what we're seeing, so what AFA are seeing, the effects of Bluetongue on current stock and calves and lambs, as I've mentioned. So we think that we're going to be talking a lot more about what people are experiencing. We're still going to be promoting vaccination as a way of mitigating risk and just supporting stock and protecting people's businesses for the future. And, hopefully we're going to continue to look at what helpful resources we can produce collectively as that industry group. And one of which is, we're developing frequently asked questions all the time. So that we had a webinar in the last week, and there were quite a few questions around vaccination and availability of vaccines. So we're looking at responding to that. And we're also planning another webinar towards the end of April, and that's going to have a range of speakers from AFA talking about what they are seeing at the moment and what that looks like. So for anybody, any farmer, I would say it'd be useful to dial into that, and again with vets as well, because this series that we've produced does apply to both.
I think the key thing here is that, all the kind of the words that we've used here, like you say, this is around diligence, and it is going to be an ever-evolving, flexible situation. It isn't something where we can just map out exactly what's going to happen and the information that people need to know when, but our role is to make sure that all of that information is available and it's proactively pushed out to farmers and levy payers so they can understand the impact. So, Jennifer, thank you for explaining what we do from a communication side for Bluetongue. We're going to take a short break now in the podcast, and when we come back, we're going to be joined by my colleague David Swales, and we're going to be talking about a calculator that we've created to understand the impact of Bluetongue on your farm.
Hi, I'm Olivia Bonser, Senior Analyst at AHDB, with a look at grain and oilseed markets for the week commencing the 31st of March. Domestic feed wheat prices have continued to fall over the last few weeks, with May 25 futures falling to a contract low last Friday. UK prices follow global markets down on the back of updates surrounding the war in Ukraine, favourable weather forecasts and weak global export demand. Ongoing talks brokered by the US for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine are impacting market direction at the moment. Beneficial rain is expected in the US, Russia and Eastern Europe. Following a dry period, this is expected to ease concerns over winter crops and improve the 2025 harvest outlook, adding further bearish sentiment. Paris rapeseed futures, however, have been well supported over the last couple of weeks. This was mainly driven by limited supply in the EU and bullish sentiment in Canadian canola futures. As Northern Hemisphere crops enter their key development stage over the coming weeks, conditions in key producing regions will remain in focus. Any updates on relations in the Black Sea and the impact on exports will also be a key driver. To stay up to date with the latest data and analysis across arable, red meat and dairy markets, head to hdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
If you're in the market for another podcast to subscribe to, then look no further than our Manager's Special, AHDB's Food and Farming podcast. Recent episodes include a consumer insight offering on red meat labels and supermarket aisles, as well as a dairy special about our work with retailers to promote milk. If you're after herbs, or rather herbal lays, our shelves are stacked with sage advice on how to introduce lucerne and clover into your fields. In fact, we cater for all tastes, so you'll find sections dedicated to all sectors: pork, cereals and oilseeds, dairy and beef and lamb. And don't forget our middle aisle, where you can often pick up a bargain episode you didn't know you needed to listen to. Search Food and Farming wherever you get your podcasts. AHDB thanks you for your custom.
So welcome back to Agonomics. In part 2, we're going to be talking about a calculator that we've created. I mean, we do a podcast on agricultural economics, and we spoke about communications in the first part of it. So it's a sin if we don't talk about economics in some form. So we're getting back to our raison d'etre in this second half of the podcast. So I'm joined by David Swales, who heads up all of our livestock market analysis in AHDB and our retail and consumer insight work that we do. David, do you want to just explain what this calculator is that has been created, what it does, and why? Why is it there?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, David. And yeah, I can tell you're itching to get back to your safety ground of economics and data and numbers. And certainly the calculator gives us plenty of scope to talk about all of those things. So basically, the calculator is a simple to use tool which we've developed, which helps farmers and vets to calculate the cost of vaccinating their sheep and beef cattle against Bluetongue virus. The calculator then goes through and works out for them what some of those economic risks from the virus are, and hopefully helps people make a decision about what's best for their farm. So this kind of sits as part of that Battle Bluetongue campaign, which Jen has been speaking about. And it's about empowering farmers and vets to make a good decision.
And that's, I think, the key thing, isn't it, really, with this, is that, you know, we want people to make the right decisions. And it's going to be one of those ones where that decision may change as time goes on based on the conditions of the disease and the conditions of the market as well.
Absolutely. So there's lots of uncertainty with Bluetongue, and it's an emerging disease. We don't know everything about the disease, and it'll obviously play out differently in different scenarios. So we've tried to accommodate that uncertainty within the calculator. So what we've done at AHDB is the economics team have worked really closely with our colleagues in animal health and welfare to come up with some different scenarios of how Bluetongue might play out, from a sort of mild scenario all the way up to like a really severe scenario. So we've kind of modelled these different scenarios and kind of looked at the different ways in which Bluetongue might impact a farm. So, John, I mean, the most obvious way is some animals may die as a result of Bluetongue. So we can look at different levels of mortality on the farm. We can look at the impacts on the growth of animals, the sort of productivity type impacts. And finally, what the impacts might be in terms of fertility for animals on the farm. So we kind of look at all these factors across our different scenarios and do a bit of a cost-benefit analysis. So the farmer or the vet can see, John, this is what it's going to cost, and this is what potentially you might save. And hopefully that's then really useful information for the farmer to discuss with his or her vet and make the right decision for them.
I suppose that's the key thing, as you mentioned there. It's all about understanding what's right for you and right for your business, isn't it? Because it depends on, again, as we said, sort of the spread of disease and, worst case scenario, especially given the mortality rates that we've seen on the continent. And if we get a similar level of mortality rates in the sheep flock, that's a pretty considerable impact that we would have. So there is a real risk. And, in terms of, from a market's perspective, we're already seeing those record high cattle prices. And whilst you don't get the mortality impacts on cattle, it obviously kind of impacts productivity and growth rates, etc. So it's pretty much, I was going to say the worst possible time, but, disease there isn't a good time, is there? But it's in an extreme time for markets whereby the impact of those, if we get those extreme mortality rates, could be huge, considering we're already at a point where we're seeing these strong prices.
Absolutely. So the beef sector in particular, John, at the minute we're seeing prices at record highs. They've been really strong throughout the last couple of months. And we know from our agri-market outlook that we're expecting that market to tighten anyway. John, supplies are expected to reduce. And indeed, our long-term forecast all the way through to 2030 is that sort of domestic supply will tighten. So the last thing we need is for Bluetongue to have like a severe impact. That would have obviously big challenges for the individual farmers affected, but will also have an impact on the wider market. So, yeah, it's now's the time, I think, for farmers to think about this as a risk, what it would mean for them, and kind of make a balanced decision about what's best going forward.
So something that's always on my mind around these kind of subjects, again, is what we're going to do next. We've kind of focused predominantly on the beef and lamb sectors. So dairy is more complex, isn't it, in terms of how that works because of the impact of the disease and the way that it works through in terms of productivity, fertility, etc. But it is something that we're going to be looking at in terms of how we can, I suppose, do more analysis in that area.
Definitely. So, John, we could be accused of doing the easy bits first, I guess. So maybe that's my failing, David. But yeah, we've developed the sheep calculator in double quick time because, John, we're obviously in lambing season at the minute. We wanted that information to be available to farmers as soon as possible so they could factor it into their decision making. The cattle calculator follows the same sort of logic, really. It's looking at the same sorts of impacts, things like fertility, productivity and mortality. I think the dairy one we are starting to work on at the minute, so we're hoping to get that out soon. Obviously, there's a loss in milk yield from infected animals, and I suspect that's probably going to be the biggest element of cost for dairy. But yeah, it's really good to have a set of tools available which individual farmers can use and use that to make a balanced decision about what's right for them.
I think that's the key thing that we've said all along is understanding the information that's out there, using all of these tools that are available to make the best decision for your farm. So if you want more information on this, all of this is available on our website. We've got the Battle Bluetongue pages on our website and the Bluetongue pages. Look out for those. There's a lot of information that's going out in webinars, so please look out for those as well. And if you want more regular information in terms of driving the market, then sign up to our Cattle and Sheep weekly newsletter, whereby we explain all that's happening in the beef and lamb markets on a weekly basis, because that would be what a weekly newsletter is, wouldn't it? Anyway, we'll wrap up there, because I'm losing it. My flu's kicking in. I'm losing my energy. I'm losing my emphasis. I should have gone for the max strength, as you said. But importantly, we have been putting in some song titles as we've gone through. And again, I think we've been on a roll with fantastic acts that we've gone through. This week's was Pet Shop Boys, who were brilliant. Surely everyone's been to a wedding in this country where Pet Shop Boys have been played.
You can't go wrong with 80s classics, can you, David?
Not at all, no.
It's a Sin might be the wrong tone for a wedding, though, just saying.